Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our EIPA in Conversation With. Today we will be debating about European defense procurement in a changing geopolitical landscape. Europe is living a very turbulent security period in the last times. Escalating military tensions involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, and spreading around the region remind us how quickly regional conflicts can have global repercussions. At the same time, Russia's war in Ukraine continues to reshape our continent's defense priorities. For European governments, institutions, and industries, these developments are not abstract. They have immediate implications for how we plan, we coordinate, and we execute defense procurement. So at this moment, Europe is asking itself, how do we ensure that our procurement systems are rapid, resilient, and capable of delivering the capabilities our armed forces need? And how do we do it, remaining transparent, efficient, and consistent with EU rules? That is a real challenge. And at EIPA, the European Institute of Public Administration, this is exactly the kind of challenge we try to address through our training and capacity building activities. If we follow the headlines across the European press and international press, defense is not longer a distant policy field. It is at the center of political decision-making. We read about urgent deliveries, joint procurement efforts, industrial bottlenecks, and we need to scale up our capabilities. And behind all of this lies a crucial question: how Europe actually organizes its defense procurement. Now, just as a brief parenthesis before we move into today's discussion, let's mention that we are organizing for May an EIPA course on European defense and security procurement. We have designed it to look at how things really work in practice, from the EU framework to the realities of cooperation between member states, and also the constant balancing between urgency, regulation, and strategic objectives. We will count with excellent experts. Some of them will be with us today. Also, the Commission will be joining us from DG Defense Industry and Space, DG DEFIS. So, in case our discussion today triggers your interest, I encourage you to register to our course. We will put the link in the chat for all of you. Let me introduce briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with us, who we are and why we are doing this kind of conversations. The European Institute of Public Administration has its anniversary this year, 45th anniversary. It was created in 1981 with the support of the European institutions and member states, and it was created in order to strengthen the capacity of public administration's civil servants at European level, national level, and regional level. This discussion today is part of a series of conversations where we bring together practitioners, academics, and policymakers to exchange views on some of the most pressing policy and governance challenges facing Europe today. So we are very fortunate at this moment to have with us three distinguished experts who will help to unpack these challenges, explore potential solutions, and reflect on what the future of the European defense procurement should look like in this rapidly evolving geopolitical environment, and at the moment that at the European Commission they are revising the public procurement directives, including defense procurement directive. We have registered participants in big numbers. Some 100 were registered to this training, so we will be looking forward to more of them joining our discussion. And the chat will be open for you in the Q&A section to make questions. You could also provide us with oral questions by raising the hand, and we would open the mic for you to put the question to the speakers. I have been planning this session that will last until 2 o'clock, divided in different blocks for discussion and providing time for debate also with you, the participants. So let's move on to introduce our experts. First, I will start with welcoming Boudewijn Heunix. Welcome, Boud. Boud is the Deputy Director for Industry, Synergies and Enables at the European Defence Agency, EDA. And there he is responsible for industry and strategy and EU defence-related policies. In his role at the agency, he contributes to strengthening European defence cooperation, supporting member states in collaborative capability development, and enhancing the competitiveness of the European defence technological and industrial base. His work focuses mainly on fostering synergies between EU policies and defence initiatives, promoting joint procurement, and supporting innovation in the defence sector. Our second speaker, not yet with us, he will be joining in a minute, is Martin Tribus. Martin is Professor of European Law and Policy, Director of the Institute of European Law, and Associate Head of a School at the University of Birmingham. His research focuses on political economy of European integration, with a particular emphasis on defence cooperation, EU governance, and institutional dynamics shaping policy development. He has published extensively on European defence policy, in procurement, and industrial strategy. His work provides critical insight into the challenges of fragmentation, sovereignty, and integration in European defence procurement. Finally, our third speaker is Leon Castellanos. I don't dare to pronounce your second family name, Leon, sorry. Very welcome to this conversation. Leon is a senior researcher in international law at the University of Amsterdam, Faculty of Law, as well as the Asser Institute for International and European Law in The Hague. He has recently co-authored a paper on European defence procurement and regulatory reform, and we will be debating around this paper as well, because it offers important insights on governance, strategic autonomy, and the rule of law. We will put the link to the publication also in the chat in a minute. So thank you to all our speakers for joining us today. And we will be entering immediately into our discussion. As I said, I planned 3 different blocks. We will have around 15 minutes for each block, 5 minutes per speaker, and moments for debate and exchange. So we will start looking at the geopolitics and strategic context in which we are right now. As already said in the introduction, Europe is facing multiple shocks: Ukraine, now the Middle East escalation involving the US, Israel, and Iran, and all the region far away, highlighting the need for rapid coordinated capability development. So I will start with you, Boud, with your permission. From the European Defence Agency perspective, there has been an increasing emphasis on joint procurement and industrial capacity building. How are these geopolitical developments influencing member states' priorities for collaborative defence procurement, in your opinion?
So thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So fortunately or unfortunately, the geopolitical circumstances act as a catalyst. We can clearly see the EU member states much more willing to cooperate for capability development. The priorities have not changed very much, let's say it this way. They have changed somewhat, for instance, for increased use of drones, for instance, on the battlefield in some innovative way. But the priorities themselves have not necessarily changed. But what we really can see is that there is a willingness, more and more willingness from the member states to do joint capability development and to go towards joint procurement. No, it's not that easy because of the urgency. Lots of initiatives are taking place in parallel, basically. And lots of actors are taking separate actions. Member states are working together, but also working, especially the larger ones, working on their own. And the many EU institutions are taking new initiatives forward, like the priority capability area that have been identified in the white paper last year. So things are moving quite fast, much faster than before. You can clearly see that the member states are much more willing to cooperate and do joint procurement together, but we are not yet everywhere at the stage where you can do the joint procurement. Before doing the joint procurement, the member states must agree what they want. They must agree on common requirements. They must consolidate their demands. And that is actually one of the most difficult parts of the process. In many joint procurement, you have different versions of the equipment that is being produced. We've seen that in many former programs. And we should try to avoid that. I hope that this will be reduced as much as possible when we really reach the point of making joint procurement. The joint procurement that we are currently managing is mostly related to off-the-shelf equipment, expendable equipment such as ammunition and so on. So that is fairly standard, and for that you don't need to have so much harmonization of requirements. But when we will move more towards weapon systems, so complicated systems, I'm curious to see how the requirements will be harmonized. And that's one of the roles of EDA, to try to get the member states to harmonize their requirements and to move towards joint procurement. But obviously we cannot force them. As we say, you can take a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. So it will be in the end for the member states to decide. The only thing we can do is to try to help them as much as possible and guide them towards common solutions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we are not yet there. I move now to Leon, also leaning on your recent paper, which analyzes procurement regulation. In this fast-changing environment where, things are moving, but we are not yet there, according to Bout, how should Europe balance the urgency in which we are with maintaining regulatory standards, how to manage flexibility versus legal certainty, speed with accountability? Please give us your opinion.
Thank you so much. Gracias for the question and for the invitation. And I just want to start by acknowledging that the points that Baud has mentioned are extremely relevant, and I'll be touching on some of those as well. So I want to start by rethinking the way the question is often framed, the urgency/accountability trade-off, which is definitely real, but not always binary. And treating it as a binary can lead us to some pernicious places. And so the implicit assumption is that moving fast requires cutting legal corners, and that the rule of law can be a drag on readiness and preparedness. And so I want to argue the opposite, that the current challenge is in part a product of decades in which Europe has been doing exactly that, trying to move fast at the national level, invoking security exemptions, sometimes liberally, and ending up with 27 fragmented defense markets with inflated procurement costs. In the end, that results in a continent that in the 12 months after February 2022 sent most of its procurement euros to non-European suppliers, and most of that, of course, to the United States of America. I would like to acknowledge that Martin has now joined us, and welcome, Martin. Looking forward to the exchange. Just to continue with this opening diagnosis of the geopolitical part, I think Europe's procurement problem is not necessarily legal or primarily legal. It is a political economy problem as well, with some legal symptoms. The legal symptom, one of them at least, is Article 346 TFEU, the treaty-level provision that allows member states to derogate from EU procurement rules when they consider it necessary for their essential security interests. Now, in theory, of course, we all know that this exemption is quite narrow and that the Court of Justice has long said it should be interpreted restrictively, applied case by case, with the member states bearing the burden of proof in order to use that article. Now, in practice, it has functioned as more or less a standing invitation to national procurement nationalism. Research published in Utrecht University a couple of weeks ago, covering only 2 member states, the Netherlands and Germany, and identified 16 invocations of 346 for contracts above 50 million euros between 2020 and mid-25. And so the Commission, despite having explicit powers under 348 to bring infringement proceedings, has relatively declined to do so for the most part. And so the result is a fragmented market that, according to IMF modeling, also published in a recent paper, effectively imposes a self-inflicted tariff equivalent to about 45% cost premium in manufacturing and 110 in services. And so Europe is paying for its fragmentation. It's not saving by it. Now, what is genuinely new about this 2025 framework is that it tries to engineer flexibility, right? Coming back to that concept into the system rather than going around it. And so the set of options and opportunities that states have has never been so vast. So SAFE, the 150 billion loan instrument that entered into force in May, allows member states to use the negotiated procedure without prior publication. And so this is fast. EDIP introduces, which came into force late last year, structures for joint procurement, the SEAPs, those international organizations that it creates for joint procurement, the military sales catalog, and an option for the Commission to act as a central purchasing body that creates a legal architecture within which urgency and speed can be exercised. Even when EDIP allows procurement on an urgent basis, it does so within a framework. At least 3 entities from 3 countries, a procurement agent appointed by consensus, and accountability to the Commission. So in other words, the legislative innovation is here, and it's not about deregulation. It is the construction of a fast lane inside the rule of law system rather than an emergency exit or roundabout from it. And so to close this opening part, Gracia, I would like to say that the critical question, the real test here, is whether member states are going to use that fast lane and all of those new options that they have in front of them, or continue to rely on the Article 346 options. There are already signs that they will probably also default to 346. Germany has announced it intends to invoke it whenever possible, and that is a political choice, which could be dressed up as a legal one, and it is precisely the pattern that the Commission wants to break. The Defense Omnibus represents also an important shift, and it clarifies 346 invocations in defense procurement, which remain subject to scrutiny. So I will just close by saying that speed and legal certainty are not enemies in this framework, but they require political will to use the instruments Europe has built, and a Commission that is willing to enforce the instruments that already exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leon. Thank you very much for all the data provided. I am sure that Martin now can build on that, because we are all sure that this fragmented and constrained public procurement by national individual sovereignty is shifting, is changing. We have the instruments, as you mentioned, at hand. Whether are we going to use it and put it as a political priority is something to see. And I would really enjoy learning from Martin what is his opinion on this. Thank you, Martin.
So thank you very much, Gracia. Sorry that I didn't hear the entire introduction. I'm doing this between 2 seminars, and I'm glad that actually our hour here is that I don't have a seminar then. About the basic question, are we now really moving towards an internal market for defense goods? Or is this continuing to be conducted on a national basis with national priorities, with actually barriers to trade in armaments existing like they don't exist in any other area? I'm afraid that my impression so far is that I think it will stay fragmented. I have also the impression that perhaps at the national level, the interpretation of Article 346 is changing. So it is actually moving towards a wider interpretation of Article 346. And because there is so much procurement activity, there are now more cases possibly than there have ever been in the past at the national level. In some countries, there are 346 cases now for the very first time. And none of these cases indicate a restrictive approach to Article 346. Perhaps before I really criticize that, I should perhaps make an argument for the national authorities of doing so. I think Article 346 tries to accommodate national security concerns, and even the Commission in its interpretive communication of 2006 indicated that where you are in Europe, so today that would mean, are you close to Russia and Ukraine, or are you further away from it, might be a consideration. Whether you have only a very small defense industrial capacity, or whether you have a relatively wide defense industrial capacity. Whether it could be not just the proximity to Russia, it could also be other geographical considerations. So, for example, look at the most extreme case. For me, the most extreme cases are always Cyprus and Finland. So let's pick Finland because that's closer to Russia. Obviously, I don't foresee any problems of Cyprus with Russia, but I could imagine problems that Finland might have with Russia. And here we're not talking about a country that has over 1,000 kilometers of direct border with Russia, but also a country that is dominated by dependency on seaways, because there you might say, oh, just bring it by train via Sweden and Norway. But that's not actually so easy, because Sweden and Norway are connected through Lapland. That is completely freezing over, covered in snow. The railways are not really working very well. So actually, if you need to bring in ammunitions, armaments, and so forth into Finland in the winter months, you can only do it through a very narrow corridor, which is also into Helsinki and Turku. And that is also quite close to Russia. So what I'm saying is that there might be a certain justification post 2022 for allowing certain member states, if they can justify it, more leeway in their actions. So what might Finland, and I'm not talking just out of theory, there is actually a case decided last month in Finland. I call it the Finnish small arms case. You could also call it the Heckler and Koch case, where basically all this was combined. The Court of Justice, because there is a proportionality test inside Article 346, at least I think it's a proportionality test. Many people think it's kind of giving even more leeway to the member states. I say it's a proportionality test. I also believe that you can accommodate almost any situation inside the proportionality test. And there, the Finnish court, not the European court. The European court hasn't changed its jurisprudence yet. There hasn't been a post-2022 case on 346 yet, on 346A, but not on 346(1)B. And the court says, look at the post-2022 situation, the geopolitical situation, the Russian invasion, plus look at Finland's geography, plus look at Finland's history. We actually had, it's a long time ago, we had 2 wars in the 1940s against the Soviet Union. The Winter War and the Continuation War. So this is not just a theoretical scenario. We've been there. We lived through this. And after that, since there was no war since the 1940s, we then had what many people nastily call Finlandization. So where basically Finland always had to take Russian interests or Soviet interests into account to survive as an independent nation. Being able to see what happens if you get it wrong in the Baltic states, which until the 1990s were, of course, part of the Soviet Union. So it's a combination. So Finland is a particularly strong case, okay, where you say, in this case, small arms, we will award by direct award outside the directives, outside EU law, a 20-year comprehensive framework agreement about small arms, maintenance, ammunition, everything. So with the only Finnish contractor, in cooperation with the Swedish Defense Procurement Authority, FMV, but we will award it to them because we need the production to happen in Finland because we cannot really live without it. Whether that can be argued in a case that is further west, whether Portugal or Belgium could argue the same that Finland can argue is a different matter. So my impression, though, is, and here it's also something where we have to look at what do governments want? They clearly want to have, they want to be out of EU law, it seems, but through 346. What do the industries want? The industries definitely want this. It's my impression that the MODs are only repeating what the defense companies feed them to a certain extent, and the judges seem to be showing a certain deference by also taking on board what their ministers of defense do, because they're very nervous about the security situation and they don't want to undermine the national security of their countries. So what I see with that is that, and this is problematic because, of course, now this is economically a lot more important, a lot more money is put into defense. You can very, very clearly see a substantial increase in member states. I mean, Germany, Finland, Belgium, those are the countries that I just remembered. They're really going up. You know, they are already past the 2% GDP mark. It's really impressive what has been mobilized there. But ideally, in their own territories, if they have the defense industrial capacity. Background to this, I think, is some of the problems are inflated, and I think ultimately a lack of trust.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Martin. I think we are speeding up the debate, the discussion, and we will move on then to the second block of our conversation about governance. You already mentioned it. How is this tension between this strategic and autonomy, the rule of law, and the respect for the principles? How are we dealing with the different, as you see, the different ways of dealing by the different member states, legal certainty for contracting authorities, and what are the implications for industry? So we have a lot of different questions here, and I would like to discuss on those with the three of you again. Let's go back now first to Leon, then Wout, and finally Martin. Please, Leon, how do you see this situation after the discussion we have heard from Wout and Martin as well? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gracia. No, I think I agree with a lot of what has been said. And if we were to seg into discussions about rule of law, but more specifically accountability, I could say the following. So again, I think current reforms are not primarily pitting flexibility and rule of law against each other. They're attempting something far more novel, which is to be building a supranational procurement infrastructure for a domain that has historically been the last corner of national sovereignty. And so this is a constitutional project just as much as it is a regulatory project. And so that in itself generates tensions that are not primarily legal, but also political, as both of my co-panelists have already said. So let me tell you a little bit about how this represents certain challenges. So research using the EU's tender electronic daily platform shows that mandatory reporting for defense contracts, that only about 10% of this spending is actually reported there. So accountability, transparency. 3/4 of these contracts that are reported there go to national firms, and cross-border awards remain limited to smaller member states. So we're not talking about a procurement market with transparency problems. We're talking about a market where the basic infrastructure of accountability and visibility, competitive tendering, published award decisions, and judicial review, is absent for the overwhelming majority of spending. And that absence is not accidental. It's the accumulated effect of decades of 346 invocations, government-to-government arrangements that have already been mentioned, and a commission that is too cautious to enforce the rules that it has. So when you have different programs that are invisible to each other, well, it's of course difficult to overcome the fragmentation. Now, what do the reforms change? EDIP introduces several innovations that are worth highlighting. The SEAPs, the structures of European armament programs, which are included in EDIP. These are, I call them mini international organizations. We can call them something else. Essentially, they have legal personality. I have a background in international law, and to me that means that they also have potentially privileges and immunities in domestic legal systems. So for the first time, these entities give joint procurement consortia legal personality, and this matters because it creates a contracting entity that can be held accountability, rule of law, which can bear rights and obligations and can also be brought before tribunals theoretically. The governance deficit that I want to flag is one that receives almost most attention, which is that the accountability architecture for these joint procurement mini international organizations is largely absent because many questions remain. So SAFE and EDIP create incentives for pooled purchasing, but who is the contracting authority when 3 member states jointly acquire air defense systems through SEAPs? What remedies exist for unsuccessful tenderers? Which court has jurisdiction? Is it the 3 states that have established the consortium? Is it a 4th state that is providing the raw materials? What about that state? And how is parliamentary oversight exercised over procurement decisions made through EU instruments rather than through national budgets? So I will close here by saying that the rule of law in EU defense procurement is not necessarily threatened by the new instruments. It is threatened by the continued reluctance to enforce old ones and by building new spending architecture without first answering the question of, well, who answers for it when things are broken or things go wrong?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leon. So with this panorama about how does EDA, your agency, support transparent, well-governed collaborative procurement across member states? How are you encouraging coordination mechanisms? What are the difficulties? How do you see the future? Thank you, Wout.
Thank you for the question. Actually, I will answer it partially, but rebound on what Leon has said, because that's a very interesting comments. And for your information, I'm advising also the council when they negotiate the EDIP, SAFE, and everything in their working parties. So it's interesting to see those discussions. Obviously, I cannot say anything about the details of those discussions, but it is very, very interesting, and also very interesting to know where some of them the proposals come from. On the problem in terms of legal structure, the problem of collaborative procurement is that there is no handbook that explains how to do it. I wrote a book on the law of collaborative defense procurement, but I didn't explain how to do it, and maybe I will when I leave EDA publish a new version of the book. But the issue is, and I must add, that is an issue for many EU member states, because the larger member states, they don't necessarily need to cooperate. Some member states are so used to cooperate, like Belgium and the Netherlands cooperating together, or the Nordics cooperating together in NORDEFCO. They are so used to work together that for them it's almost automatic. They know how to do it. but for lots of other member states, they are not used to that, and there is no handbook to explain them. So you can go through, and it's not simply the principle. Yes, you can go through a lead nation, as we call it. So one of the member states that procures for the benefit of the others. You can procure through OCCAR. You can procure through EDA. You can procure to a NATO agency. And by the way, the CIAPs were inspired by the NATO agencies that manage NATO programs, such as NETMA, NAHEMA, and so on. It's even an idea that one of the panelists suggested to the Commission. I will not say who. But the possibilities, there are lots of different possibilities that all have different legal implications, that all have different legal structures. The CIAP are so new, by the way, that and that's something that I was telling the member states, that I can say, that's something that I was telling the member states. It's, yes, EDIP tells you the procedure that you need to follow to create a CIAP, and there you need to identify applicable law and so on. You need to file that request to the Commission, and the Commission approves or asks you to change, and then when they approve, you will have a CIAP with a few member states. But then what do you do? And I was telling the member states, if the CIAP needs to hire personnel, they need to have personnel regulation. They need to have a human resource department. If the CIAP wants to buy itself equipment, they must have procurement rules. Even if they are exempted from complying from the directive, the procurement officer must have rules that they apply. If the CIAP is managing budget from the member states, it needs financial rules. So all those things will need to be put in place when you create a CIAP. So the issue is, and you can have different rules for different CIAP as well. So that's what makes this joint procurement very difficult. It's that you have so many possibilities that first it's hard to choose from them, and second, if you're looking for applicable law, competent jurisdiction, and so on, it will be different in every case. So that's what makes it very complicated. In terms of accountability, there will always be some form of accountability, because even when a program is not published in an official journal or in TED or something, the people who do the procurement will be internally towards their governance structure. They will still be accountable. If you if you spend 1 billion to buy fighter jets, for instance, the procurement agency will be accountable to their parliament, to their domestic parliament, to their government, and there will be lots of control structures in place. Even if it's not transparent for the public, there will be always some form of accountability, but of course not the accountability we are used to. What can EDA do to help in all that mess, if I might say so? So as I said in my first intervention, we are facilitating the harmonization of the requirements of the member states and bringing them towards joint procurement. But in the end, it is the member states who decide if they do joint procurement or not, and through which vector, through a lead nation, through OCCAR, through EDA. Another thing that we are doing is, and that we will be doing more and more, is to help the member states improve their administrative capacity in terms of defense procurement, in particular joint procurement. This is one of the missions that we want to improve, because, as I said, some member states know very well how to cooperate, some others don't, and so there is lots of exchange of best practices that can be done. And we expect to expand on this. Would it only be to provide advice? I wouldn't say like consulting, because I wouldn't say we're free, because the member states pay our salaries. but it's not as if you would pay a big consulting company to redraft the procurement law of the member states. So those are the things we can do at EDA. But again, joint procurement is a complex process because there are so many possibilities, and the legal instruments that Leon mentioned do not solve those issues. They support the member states in some aspects, like in joint procurement, they will give funding, subsidies, let's say, to the member states who do joint procurement, but the instrument don't tell the member states how to do the actual procurement. So they don't solve that issue. They are more of an incentive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Bout. Martin, I'm sure you want to add and share your ideas on the comments made by Leon and Bout on this issue. How is it going to be working with joint procurement, accountability? Are we really able, and do we have the capacities in our public sector to deal with all these challenges? How do you see it from your academic perspective?
Something very closely related, and I'm responding to both previous speakers, Leon and Baud. I think my impression is before 2022 and now the same, what most member states really want is they want national champions. And they will use all possibilities, including joint procurement, 346, and all other possibilities to ensure that there is such a national champion, if at all possible. Of course, there are a few member states they can't have a national champion because they don't have any defense industries. Yeah, I'm not. I might be here not sufficiently informed, but like Cyprus, Malta, Luxembourg, yeah, that there might be limits there. But especially the large member states, France has always been very outspoken about it. But now I can definitely see that in Germany emerging as well, and even kind of the middle powers. For example, Belgium clearly wants FN Herstal as a national champion, and Sokol in Finland, and so on. If you have a company, you want to do that. It's just that happens then in two different ways, and that has implications for joint procurement, for accountability, for all aspects of it. How do I get there? How do I get my national champion surviving? And the arguments are quite interesting. So many countries will just talk about security of supply. And I need to have this national champion because basically supply from any other member state is not quite safe, can never be guaranteed because of license requirements, because of political changes. Yeah. And then there's something which I find very interesting. I found that in a Belgian case recently. The idea, so the Belgian idea of having Herstal as a national champion is not the same as in Germany, because Germany is kind of just thinking, for example, German in this context, German industries, we want to keep a German. Yeah, we can even have competition just amongst domestic suppliers in some areas. So we're quite happy to just close the borders and that's it. Whereas Belgium has a more sophisticated argument there. They're saying we need to keep a national champion to have a lever in when we actually all come together, sit on one table, yeah, and basically see how do we do joint procurement? How do we organize the European defense industries? How do we approach the European dimension? We need a lever because otherwise Belgium is not sitting at the table, but is listed on the menu of all the other member states. So that I think this is a very, very important feature, both before 2022 and after, of having these national champions.
Thank you, Martin. Indeed, well, Europe has to be ready for quite long, persistent instability. And we definitely need to plan procurement that will be efficient, integrated, and legally sound. But listening to you, are we really capable of moving towards a truly integrated defense procurement market, or are our national interests prevailing and we are still thinking in terms of national sovereignty? So I would like to move now to the third block and looking a little bit into the future. I will start with Bout. What are the main priorities the EDA, the agency, identifies to strengthen European defense capabilities and procurement cooperation? Because the reality shows that we are still far away. There are some ideas and efforts, and we even have the instruments. But what are the priorities on the table to really move fast?
So I will not discuss the capability priorities in terms of military equipment, but rather in terms of structure. First, we need to use or to have a structure that allows the member states to converge towards joint procurement. And we have a structure already within the agency, but the member states need to use it effectively and use it quickly. In normal times, you know, when a few member states want to initiate collaborative procurement, they will need to sign an intergovernmental agreement among themselves saying, I want to do this and we want to do that and so much money and so on. Memorandum of Understanding very often is the name that's used. You know, I've negotiated lots of those things in my former life. It takes 2 years. From the idea of, yes, we want to cooperate, towards having the legal instrument that creates actually the cooperation. And I'm not even talking about the contract. I'm talking about the agreement between the member states. 2 years is very normal. It's not in 2 years. If we would do that to support Ukraine, for instance, Ukraine would still be waiting. If you allow me to say so. So member states must use the structure that brings them to work together, but also they must do an effort to try to avoid unnecessary negotiation, unnecessary customization of equipment as well. You know, I was advising someone who was doing a PhD and who was working on the defense administration of a small country, not far from Belgium and not far from the Netherlands as well, by the way. And that guy was saying, yeah, we are buying 6 armored jeeps for our small armed forces. We're buying the same as the Dutch and the Danish are using, but obviously we need to customize them. And I was telling him, you're buying only 6 jeeps and you have such a small armed forces. Why do you customize them? And if it's good for the Dutch, if it's good for the Danes, why do you want to customize them? And he said, yeah, but our military have very specific requirements. And then obviously the next question is, how can you have very specific requirements that are purely national? Yes, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. For instance, in Finland, if you want to operate in the north of Finland, you don't necessarily need the same type of equipment that you would be using in the south of Europe. But if we're talking about countries in the same regional area, why do we have specific national customization? On one very large program I worked on, there was one large country that also not far from Belgium and not far from the Netherlands, that had a very specific requirements that was technically very challenging. They really insisted to include it. Then it was included as a specific national option. And then after a few years, the manufacturer of the equipment came back and said, well, actually, technologically, it is at this stage impossible to meet the requirement. And that very large country said, oh, you know, you may drop it because the guy who really wanted it is now retired. And I'm not joking. Huh? That's really true. So we must stop. That's really a priority, to stop customizing, to stop gold plating. And also we need clear rules. And as Leon said, it's not because you work quick that you lose necessarily accountability, but we need clearer rules in times of crisis and in times of operation. When I say that to the Commission, their answer is, yeah, but in the current directive, in times of crisis, you're allowed to use the negotiated procedure without publication. So from our point of view, everything's solved. But when you turn to the member states and you tell them, yeah, you see, everything's solved, you can use the negotiated procedure without publication. In many member states, then the question is, yeah, but how do I do it concretely in times of crisis? And it's not that evident. The problem is not necessarily the rules, but also the practice. If we take the example of Ukraine, what have they done in terms of drones, for instance? It's really interesting. They have an online platform and kind of Amazon for drones in Ukraine. And the battalion commanders are allowed to order not their own personally, but the own drones for their battalion directly. They have a budget for that. And by the way, the more my video disappeared for some reason. Yeah, the more effectively they use their drones, especially their attack drones, the more credits they get for buying additional drones. So really the delegation is done up to the level of the battalion commander. But can you do that in peacetime? I would advise against it. But can you do that in wartime? Yes, Ukraine did it. And is it efficient? Yes, it is. So we should think about those type of solutions, but having them ready, because Ukraine had to invent those solutions when the war started. And
very interesting, and thank you very much. I also see already a question in the Q&A, but let me finish this round first. Talking about the future, we are now talking about how difficult it is, and it's not because of the law, but also the political willingness and the preparedness, the capacity that we see for cooperating in procurement or having joint procurement. Let's move on now to Martin. So we often talk about the need to accelerate our defense procurement sector. We really need to grow into a sort of strategic European Union autonomy when it comes to defense, and we are still so dependent in others' defense technology. So how is the European Union moving towards this integrated defense procurement market, and will national industrial strategies continue to dominate in your opinion? Thank you very much, Martin.
Yes. I'm afraid I'm a bit pessimistic about, wait a minute, from a point of view of closer integration, I'm a bit pessimistic about at least the immediate future. My overall impression, despite all these things, the omnibus and the finance and all these instruments, is that there's a lot of business as usual. So everybody is procuring a lot more than before, but with essentially the same mindset as before, with not as much change fundamentally there. And I think the term acceleration is key. Acceleration, speeding things up because of the national security situation. Whatever we do, we need to do it faster. That is not necessarily good for European integration, because European integration or the internal market for defense good is not sufficiently settled, is not sufficiently smooth yet to actually accommodate that acceleration. So in a way, I think doing things quickly. So I can just give you a good example, Germany again. Yeah, in Germany, you even have a Defense Procurement Acceleration Act, one immediately in 2022 and one brand new from this year, only come through recently. And what is the basic essence of this? the basic essence of this seems to be, to me, I mean, there's a lot of talk about joint procurement and so on, although not really much flesh to the bone, is basically push EU requirements out. Yeah. So we must use Article 346 more often. We must limit access to remedies, to judicial review in defense procurement. So no more ineffectiveness. Yeah. Only fines instead. We're no longer meeting in court in review proceedings. We do it all on paper. Yeah, that sort of thing. So it seems that acceleration actually means less Europe rather than more. Yeah. So I'm afraid in that context, and the big word here is national strategic autonomy. I think we need to really get a full grip on that, because ultimately, when we think about it, it doesn't entirely make sense. Yeah, if there is really a war situation within the next few years before 2030, as is now a valid possibility, then no nation in the EU will actually be able to be completely autonomous, will be able to defend itself on its own. It's a complete illusion. Yeah, this will not work. This will only work within NATO. Hopefully it will still be there at the time, or alternatively it will have to happen within the EU. And it seems to me generally that it's this whole business as usual, if not even worse than before from an integration point of view, is just going to continue, and it's going to have negative effects. It's going to make everything, I think it's going to slow things down. It's going to make everything more expensive. And when everything gets more expensive, there is less bang for the buck.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martin. So we are in this dichotomy, speed versus rule of law or others. Leon, you have been working in your paper on these topics, and I would like also to have this look into the future. After listening to Wout and Martin, can you give us your opinion on all this? Thank you.
Of course, thank you very much. Well, I do want to close. A lot of the points that Martin and Wout mentioned resonated with me, and in particular the accountability point that Martin has just mentioned. And I will save that for last. So I have 3 points in this closing section. First, about the military procurement directive, which is, of course, now being discussed. 346, and I'll close with accountability. So perhaps for the first time, the legislative architecture in the EU is ahead of the political will to use it. And so if we think about this statement, which is quite bizarre if you actually stop for a moment, but good news, right? We have a lot of instruments and tools at our disposal, and start talking about the directive revision, which must succeed. I think this is a very important development in this field, looking forward and towards the future. A public consultation ran until February of this year, and the Commission has committed to putting a formal proposal forward in 2026. So the stakes are high, because this is the instrument that, as we have been discussing here, governs the vast majority of defense procurement that is not covered by EDIP and SAFE. It is the baseline of national rules, which member states are using. So we need to pay attention to this as well. And so the critical questions are, what happens to 346 interaction when the directive is going to be revised? Does the revision include mandatory reporting? As Wout has also been discussing, are government-to-government contracts, which are currently exempt from the directive scope, brought at least within a transparency framework? I'm not saying that they need to come under the directive full lock, stock, and barrel, but come within a sort of, let's not mirror efforts and let's not create redundancies, let's create some bridges and information flow. And how does the revision handle the increasing reality of dual-use technology, which, of course, as we see in Ukraine, again, as Wout has been discussing, is a major feature of war and asymmetrical war today. So this revision is very, very important. Second, 346 needs principled guidance, and this is just a proposal out of the box, but the omnibus communication from the Commission on state aids and 346 shows that it is capable of issuing guidance on this provision. So it should do the same for procurement. And it should also be willing to use infringement proceedings in case of clear abuse. At minimum, a principal guidance would look like transparency requirements so that invocations are at least publicly disclosed, even when procurement details are not. I'm not saying let's put all of the national security secrets on full display. I'm saying, let's monitor the latency of 346 and how often it is being used and by whom. A sunset clause is also important so that invocations are tied to ongoing emergencies and current emergencies, but do not become permanent features of the machinery. And Germany's announcement, for example, that it will invoke 346 whenever possible, as I discussed earlier, is legally aggressive, but politically understandable. But if we continue with that pattern and if it spreads, it entrenches exactly the fragmentation that the Rearm Europe package is trying to overcome. And finally, the accountability architecture for the new instruments. I think there is a lot more to unpack within this architecture, as has been discussed as well. And moving forward, we need to understand who has jurisdiction, under what circumstances, what's the relationship to national laws. Can unsuccessful tenderers from third associated countries, not just in the EU, but Ukraine, Norway, Canada, challenge award decisions? These are open questions. And as has been mentioned, we will be learning as we do things, but also I think we should hedge ourselves and try to implement some guidance before the money starts flowing, because this will prepare states and SEAPs and other stakeholders for a moment when it comes to have accountability. So a lot has been happening in procurement reform in the past few months, and the risk now is implementation lag or political retreat into 346 and unresolved accountability gaps. So if we want procurement to be effective, legally robust, we need to not just focus on building more instruments, but on using the ones that we already have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leon. Thank you to all. I think also looking at the time, we need to move now into the Q&A session. My colleague Bjorn has been searching and dealing with the questions. We have a few. So please, Bjorn, take the floor to read the questions we have from the audience.
Yes. Okay, before we zoom into questions really on the EU or the practicalities of or the particularities of the EU market, briefly zooming out, one of the participants wrote, the EU member states have the possibility to use NATO structures for the common procurement. These procurements are advertised and internationally, but not necessarily reported under EU law. Yet they deliver multinational procurement solutions. So why would EU member states not utilize this and create like parallel structures outside the NATO framework?
Who would like to answer this one? Maybe Bout or?
Yeah, I can have a go at it. It's because it's not the same political structure. If you want to have a more independent EU and if you want to develop an EU pillar in NATO, you must do something within the EU itself. So could we use NATO for everything? In theory, yes. Is NATO entirely reliable? I think that the person whom I'm sure you know who I'm talking about on the other side of the Atlantic does not necessarily make us very eager to continue cooperating in that direction. So will there be some duplication? Probably. But the word is no unnecessary duplication. If we think that a duplication is necessary, then we will duplicate.
Okay, thank you. Another question, Bjorn, please. You are muted.
And perfect. And zooming in, then also that question about like the multitude or possible multitude of coalitions of willings that then will emerge, hopefully in the short and the medium run. And a particular case was recently announced between the UK, the Netherlands, and I think it was Finland. Finland, yes. Um, how to what would be the guided approach so to not create like a diversity of approaches running again in different directions. Um, and the question in detail was, would these coalitions of willing serve as a middle ground between the national procurement and a common procurement across the EU? And yeah, would that help, or would it be like a case-by-case solution?
Maybe I'll say one thing on this. Having or thinking that we will have common procurement involving all the EU member states is an illusion. Actually, no, we are currently already working on projects that are coalitions of the willing. That's the way things have been happening over the last 30, 40 years. And that I think that's definitely in the medium term, that's the only way to go. You will have a few member states agreeing on something and purchasing together. Will that give a perfect defragmentation of demand or defragmentation of the market? No. But will the market be a little bit less fragmented? Yes. So I think that this is a pragmatic way ahead.
Thank you.
And then we had one question particularly for oh no, sorry, Bob, we already had you now a couple of times. We don't want to put you unnecessarily in sport mode, so that we go now towards Martin. From your perspective, what would be a credible multilateral framework for trade and procurement of emerging defense technologies? What would that need to contain so that it is to survive the current acceleration in this crisis-driven logic that you mentioned? Sorry, you're on mute.
You're muted, Martin.
Could you quickly repeat that for me to take it in? Because I haven't really
Yes.
computed that.
So what would a credible multilateral framework for trade and procurement of emerging defense technologies need to contain if it is to survive the current acceleration and crisis-driven logic that you mentioned before?
Wow. Wow, that's a question. First, I would say that possibly the current framework does already offer quite a lot here. So we're talking about emerging companies. We're talking about new defense technologies. We're talking about drones plus cybersecurity. And there we would also talk a lot about, well, small, medium-sized enterprises. So here we have overall 2,000 plus companies. And I hope this is what the question is about. And there we basically have the entire thing about new technologies, small and medium-sized enterprises, startups, and whether the current framework is really geared for them. This is possibly something that the directive's reform could look into, but I would also say that a lot is already done for this context. Yeah, we have, if contracts are advertised on TED, then we already have information deficit problems that these companies might have being addressed. If we have predictable procedures, then we also have certain concerns that these companies have addressed. If we've got access to remedies, then we have this addressed. So we don't need to do specific things for these companies. And then we can think about doing specific things for these companies, which are currently only accommodated in soft law instruments, and we could bring them into the directive. So we could think about maybe dividing larger contracts into smaller lots in certain circumstances. We could make qualification requirements a bit easier to meet, so yeah, turnover requirements. We could take a lot of red tape away. And then the rest is not really procurement. The rest would then be what type of state aid schemes do we have? I hope I understood the question right.
I think so, Martin. Thank you very much. I think we have another question, Bjorn, for Bout, right?
Yes. So, but it's also open for everybody to answer because the person was interested in all angles. We know that EIPA is now developing the European Defense Artificial Intelligence data space as the so-called sovereign data sharing platform for defense actors. Given the well-known gaps in TED, for defense and security, especially where classified and sensitive requirements mean that visibility and opportunities are very partial. Do you see, so now the question comes, that was all the lead up, do you see this infrastructure evolving into somewhat a backbone for curated procurement data and a secure cooperative portal to support joint and coordinated defense procurement? That was quite a difficult question.
Thank you for the question. So yes, we are developing a data space using artificial intelligence first internally, and then we will see if we use it externally as well. But in the meantime, what we have done, we have developed a fairly easy government-to-government platform, as we call it. What is it? It's simply a space where the member states can go and input, on the one hand, the projects that they are opening up to other member states, for instance, framework agreements that they are opening up for other member states, or also putting the requests they have I'm interested in this. Do you have an existing contract? Do you plan to have a contract or to launch a program for that type of thing that I need? So it's a kind of matchmaking platform for collaborative procurement, and that was used, actually we developed it for SAFE. It was used for the member states to identify collaborative programs to submit for SAFE. Now we are going to implement it or to keep it implemented on a more general manner. Actually, we already had something similar in the past, but that was not very successful. But the time have changed. Sometimes a crazy idea of 3 years ago becomes the best idea of the day of today. So we're using that government-to-government platform. We need to see how far it will bring us in terms of identifying collaborative projects, because indeed, when you publish on TED, it's too late. When you publish on TED, assuming you publish on TED, but even if you publish on TED, at the time you publish, you're actually inviting tenders from companies. So it's too late to know if you will cooperate or not. The work must happen before, and that's where those type of platform and the forums that EDA is managing also contribute to that. It's not in artificial intelligence yet. It's real intelligence and human intelligence, but we're trying to move forward with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have the last question because we are almost out of time. So please, Bjorn, could you proceed with that one?
Yes, this is now zooming out a little bit again on the impact of the US. So the US Department of Defense, their acquisition reforms 2025 and 2026, they pivoted more towards warfighting acquisition systems. And do you, towards the panel, do you see their impact of this development on the EU rearmament process?
Martin, maybe you could take the floor in this one, if you like. You are muted again, sorry.
I'm not sure I have something to contribute to that. I think it's a bit early.
It's a bit early.
It's a bit early. I would like to know that too. But perhaps, yeah, that would be what I have to say. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Does anyone else would like to add anything to this one? It's a bit early. Okay. So thank you very much, Bjorn. Thank you to all the audience for the questions they have put forward. We are going now into the closing block. I would like just to close it by asking in one sentence to our three experts, what is the single biggest obstacle to effective European defense procurement, in your opinion? I would like to get just one sentence before we say goodbye to our participants. Shall I start with Leon this time, please?
Great. Thank you, Gracia. Well, perhaps I can do some shameless self-promotion. I published an op-ed a couple of weeks ago, last month, on Euractiv, complaining about the lack of alignment between strategic and political discourse by European leaders. So that's my line.
Thank you very much. Wout, your sentence.
I would say the lack of threat perception. I would go very, very early in the process, not even into the requirement, but the lack of threat perception between the member states. That's an issue.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Martin, would you like to give us a sentence on the single biggest obstacle?
Perhaps it's a bit philosophical or religious. What I can say. I think the fundamental problem that we have, the fundamental obstacle, is a lack of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm afraid sometimes that lack of trust is justified. Okay, but not always.
Not always. Mm. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for your insightful contributions, to the audience for being with us and putting forward some of the questions. Please be reminded of our seminar in May, where we will be together with these fantastic experts again, and we will discuss on these and other topics in Maastricht. And it has been a pleasure to be with you. Looking forward to the next opportunity, and stay connected with us. Thank you so much.